I'm not a physician, but I'm surrounded by physicians a lot. And I know that a physician's life is particularly challenging and stressful. One of the things that I often notice that physicians forget or lose sight of is that the work that they do every day, from that first patient to the last patient and all of the tasks in between, is incredibly meaningful. Even if they've lost track of it, even if it's just a small thing, a touch on the arm or figuring something out that the patient couldn't possibly have figured out for themselves. So helping clinicians recognize the meaning in their work, being aware of it, and really feeling that.
Welcome to Flourishing in Medicine, from Surviving to Thriving. I'm your host, Dr. Mick Krasner, and this podcast is brought to you by Empro, a medical professional liability insurance carrier in New York State, who through this podcast and other programs offers support for the physicians they protect. In this rich and really heartfelt conversation, Dr. Todd Hill and Dr. Ward Flemons of the Cumming School of Medicine at the University of Calgary explore the deeper roots of their callings in medicine and education, and how those personal journeys have shaped a shared mission, fostering flourishing and compassionate care within medical education and healthcare delivery systems. With candor and warmth, they reflect on formative experiences from childhood, influences and early clinical mentors, to the discovery of mindfulness as a vital tool for cultivating presence, resilience, and meaning in the work of healing. Together, Drs. Hill and Flemons share how their collaboration has helped catalyze a culture change initiative at the Cumming School, grounded in mindfulness and supported by leadership engagement, curriculum innovation, and a growing community of practice. Their story reveals not only the challenges of systemic transformation, but also the surprising power of connection, curiosity, and shared vision. For health professionals seeking to reconnect with purpose and reimagine the culture of medicine, this episode offers both inspiration and a practical glimpse into what is possible. And now, enjoy my conversation with Drs. Todd Hill and Ward Flemons. Welcome to Flourishing in Medicine, from Surviving to Thriving. It's really great to have two of my colleagues from north of the border, from Canada, Todd Hill and Ward Flemons. Welcome. It's really a pleasure to have you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thanks so much for the invite, Mick. It's good to see both of you, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, great to see you, Mick. Thanks for this.
So I just want to remind the two of you about the podcast. It's about flourishing in medicine. And I know that a lot of your own work and livelihood has been caught up or intertwined with flourishing. And I was interested in having this three-way conversation specifically because of you, your histories, your interests, your work that addresses flourishing, both individually and collectively for health professionals. And, many of our podcast listeners and viewers in this case are physicians and other health professionals. So it could be especially meaningful for them. And given that many of our listeners are colleagues in a very real way, I want to start with having you discuss a little bit about why medicine. Now, I know you both have different careers in medicine, quite different, but if they have come together. And I want to see if you can go beyond biography. What I mean by that is not the kind of chronological step-by-step sort of instrumental progression of how you got to become a physician, Ward, or a psychologist, or an educator for both of you, but something underneath that. What is it that undergirded that decision to do what you do?
I got interested in medicine before I went into university, probably working with people that I went to classes with, interested in science, and then this deep sense of wanting to help people, like I think what draws many people into medicine. And then there's just the challenge, always being challenged to learn more, to then figuring out how to apply that. And it seemed like a lifelong calling, a lifelong journey. And it's not disappointed, although, as we all know, what you think you're getting yourself into doesn't always quite work out that way. So you got to adjust along the way.
So if I could, I'd just like you to dig a little deeper, Ward. You said being challenged, helping people. Those are two things that came to me pretty strongly. What do you know about yourself and how you are? How did you come to be that way? Someone who was interested in challenges, someone who was interested in helping others. What was kind of underneath that? So it's the sort of understory about that.
Yeah, I think it probably comes from family. I was fortunate to grow up in a great part of the world, but with really supportive parents who themselves never had an opportunity to go to university, but were always super ethical, upstanding people, always looked out for people, and had a wide family support. Lots of cousins, lots of relatives that were always around. So just that sense of community within the family and where we grew up. And that just, I think, fostered a sense of wanting to be that for other people as well. And then some really dear friends growing up through high school of just really, that was the most important thing, is the human connection.
Yeah, I think there's a thread that runs through a lot of us in the health professionals about that connection, and that's a really strong draw for us, and also a place of reward. We'll get more into that. Todd, how about you?
It's interesting that you're asking that question today, Mick, because yesterday that was a rabbit hole I went down a little bit. I'm sitting on a dissertation committee, and this person's committee or dissertation is about the trauma of medical education. We can talk about the pros and cons about calling it that, and all of the issues kind of around it. But anyway, I was trying to find some literature that I had heard of, that more applicants come to medical school with a background in some kind of trauma, family trauma, or early childhood trauma than the general population. And I was just accepting that to be true. Once you scratch the surface of that kind of myth, as it turns out, it's not really true, or it's not discoverable the way that we're currently measuring it. Having said that, it is true of people in psychology, that by the time people get to graduate work in psychology, there's a clear distinction between people who end up in psychology and those who don't, in terms of backgrounds of trauma, etc. So I was just looking at this yesterday, as it turns out. And with that said, my family is dysfunctional. I think it's the rare person whose family is not. But when I was 12 years old, again, just a month ago, my sister and I were having this conversation, because when I was 12 years old, I started volunteering with kids who had special needs and autism. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out how this 12-year-old who was, riding around town on his bike ended up doing this volunteer work. So my sister heard about this opportunity and she started going. And at some point I asked her if I could go, because it sounded like fun and there was a pool and they got free lunch. And so I started going there and really fell in love with the work. I think that there was an opportunity there for me to be a leader for and supporter for kids who are struggling more than I was. And it felt like I was learning for myself. I was trying to train myself to parent right, at a very early age, because I didn't feel like I had been parented right, I guess. And that stuck with me. That's how I ended up, I think, in the helping professions.
It's a really interesting phenomenon that you discussed about the myth for physicians and then the reality. But certainly we could say that a lot of health professionals, behavioral health physicians, have very close contact with suffering in some way in their, that'll be a whole nother avenue to explore, to see what the data are to support that. I'd like you, Todd, if you wouldn't mind, then taking us from, okay, so you move into behavioral health and into psychology, the events, decisions, experiences that led you to work in what now I would place in the category of helping people flourish. you'll describe it in your own way, in a more nuanced and personal way. But take us from going, deciding, and then executing to become a health professional in the name of a psychologist with that background academically and educationally into what you're doing now.
I think the main thing is education and training. And again, probably going back to, I didn't feel like I was educated the way that I wanted to. And so wanted to kind of see what were the elements that I thought were missing and trying to implement those in my own opportunities for training others. So pretty early in my career, I ended up supervising graduate students in psychology. And subsequently, I was invited to supervise psychiatry residents in CBT, et cetera. And then I was invited to supervise family medicine residents in CBT groups. And so I think that it was through teaching and supervising that it led me from clinical psychology into training people in clinical skills into a more medical education field. And that was over the course of, let's say, a decade, where it started off here and then ended up where at present I'm not doing any clinical work, and I don't know any psychologists in town. I'm surrounded by family docs for most of my days, most days. Yeah.
You must have experienced a lot of either positive reinforcement or just a sense of mission. Could we say, what was it? Yeah.
I think, like I said, in my own experience of teaching, I was excited by ideas, and I was excited by getting to know new things. And I found that there were some educators who were really able to tap into that for me. And there were some who seemed to tamp that down in me to some extent. And so I just wanted I felt kind of sense of responsibility to do more of the former for people who are excited about learning and less of the latter.
That's great. Yeah. And we'll get to, the mindfulness component in a short while, I'm sure. I wanted to ask Ward then pretty much the same. We know the decision then was made to go through medical education, medical school, but then you became a respirologist, or what we would call here a pulmonologist. And then there was a lot of other things. Can you walk us through what events, decisions, experiences that sort of began to shape that identity into someone who is really working in the domain of what I would call flourishing in medicine, whether we're talking about colleagues, ourselves, or the people we care for, the patients?
Yeah, no, I had the good fortune of during medical school, I had summer off, and I wanted to do an elective with an internist here in Calgary, who is just the most wonderful physician I think I'd ever met. I was very fortunate to be able to work with them. And both patients and his colleagues just celebrated his natural ability to connect with people just within a few minutes. And I was able to work with him for a month. It really influenced me a lot, including my future choice of where to get trained in internal medicine. And I also had a very influential critical care physician who was a respirologist, pulmonologist in your parlance, during medical school, who really stimulated my interest in physiology and working things out and helping people through understanding physiology. So I was able to apply what I studied.
And can you say a little bit about then, how did you move from that into the safety quality work? And then in what way did mindfulness sort of enter the picture and integrate into that as a way of kind of carrying forward your educational mission, we could say?
One would like to think that it was all carefully planned, orchestrated, and delivered on, but of course, rarely does it happen that way. During my training, as I was finishing it off in Calgary, I worked with a very influential, again, critical care physician in Calgary, leader of critical care, who ended up being asked by our local health region, which encompassed about 4 acute care hospitals and other types of services. He was asked to set up a new quality and safety infrastructure for the health region. We just become regionalized through our provincial mandate, and we didn't really have an approach to that. That was back in the late 1999 or so, 2000. he was looking for department representatives, and my department had indicated, due to my training, which is in healthcare outcomes research, that I might be interested in doing that. And he was right. And through him, I got introduced to the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in Don Berwick, and that planted the seeds of wanting to make things better and getting a lot of great feedback of being able to do that. So it stimulated my interest in measurement, making things better, working with people. And then I got introduced to patients who had survived tragedy, or family members of patients who hadn't survived tragedy. And that was probably the most influential thing that influenced my direction for the ensuing 20 years. And putting all those things together, seeing colleagues struggle, seeing patients struggle, and really connecting with families that had lost patients in the system due to inappropriate care, and figuring out how to make them whole again, or helping them to become whole again, was, again, just really, really meaningful.
Because the context of what brings the two of you together has to do with mindfulness, maybe you could just say a little bit about how does your experience, your background, your training in mindfulness inform those issues, the patient safety, quality, addressing needs of colleagues who are in trouble, or families who's lost family members, as you mentioned, or patients themselves suffering from whatever it is that they're suffering. Yeah, how does that fit in then? How did you discover that? I'm really curious.
I think a lot of seeds were planted for quite a while before the dots started to connect. Experiencing myself a lot of overwhelm in healthcare and trying to figure out how to handle that, and not always doing that terribly successfully. Seeing overwhelm in the patients, especially the patients that I mentioned who'd gone through tragedy, and just learning to sit with them and listen to them. I'd like to say, well, I'd learned the mindfulness techniques, and that's what allowed me to understand how important it was to talk second and not first, and just learn to listen to people's stories. But I think it was later that I started seeing some of yours and Ron's work and some other mindfulness training that I took, and realizing how important it was to apply some mindfulness techniques to both speaking but also to listening, and then finally making sense of the human experience, which is, as we all know, is one of great excitement and great accomplishments, and then some pretty lows at the same time, and just going back and forth and saying there's got to be a way to figure this out and deal with that in maybe healthier ways than I had in the past.
I kind of often use the word coming to terms with that, because it's not like you can, change it. It's just the way it is. Like you say, it's the human condition. Todd, I'm interested also in this mindfulness question. How did the experience of working in and with physician trainees in family medicine, in your case, how did that experience to teach mindfulness and teaching mindfulness impact how you saw the role of mindfulness in general in helping these individuals flourish, and also helping healthcare flourish? Because after a little while, I'd like to get to really what I think is really the central thing, which is I find so amazing about the two of you, is what you're creating at the Cumming School of Medicine in Calgary. So let's just start with that, that impact of connecting your work in mindfulness with the trainees, with how it fits into healthcare in general.
When I was hired in 2009, it was in October. So I had from October until July 1st, which is when residency starts here in Canada. I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but our first day of residency was July 1. So I had from October until July to figure out what behavioral medicine meant in the context of family medicine, and then to cultivate a curriculum that filled up the requirements for that. By surveying a number of schools in the US and in Canada, behavioral medicine in the context of family medicine really consisted of three main parts. One part being communication skills and relationship building, the other one being mental health and addictions, and the third being wellness. So I chose, because there was absolutely no training in communication skills, and there were a number of concerns about the communication skills that were being taught and passed on, et cetera. That's where I started with the curriculum. As I was pulling together this curriculum, I ran into the work that you and Ron had done at around the same time, Mick, that I had learned about the research looking at drops in empathy once people enter medical school, and specifically once they start their clerkships, and then again a significant drop at the beginning of residency or by the end of residency. So I was looking for something that could help residents mitigate that loss in some way, so that we could start to cultivate some empathy rather than just let it slide. And mindfulness was something, because I'm a psychologist and my background was health psychology, and had been working with people in PTSD clinics, etc. Mindfulness was something that I had some chops in, and there was just this nice opportunity and a clear space for it in the context of medical education, in the context of family medicine and communication skills. So that's when I started integrating it into our curriculum formally. It was in 2010. I did a poor job of it. So I've had the past 15 years to learn more about teaching it, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to discuss more about what you both have done together, this begun or led an institutional approach to lead on what I would call culture change, really. The program that the two of you have developed, are developing, and the process itself seems to require both a long view of what may be possible, but also a short view of what needs to be done or what can be done right here and now. So in a very real way, you're leading what many institutions and individuals within those institutions can only dream about, although you may not see it quite that way, but I certainly see it that way. So I'm interested in hearing, and we can start with you, Todd, hearing about how this was conceived, how it's morphed and developed, and you're starting to carry it out, and where you are with things now, and what you see the efforts need to be going forward. So specifically about the culture change initiative, is what I'm calling it, at the Cumming School of Medicine, with mindful practice being kind of at the center of it. So Todd, yeah, if you start, then I really want to hear from Ward to fill in some of the details and his own experiences on that as well.
I guess I'm thinking two things while you're asking the question. The first is my first year, where I introduced to, our residency programs in family medicine are configured differently than they are down in the US. So we have 75 residents starting every year. And so I remember that first year where I asked how many people had heard of mindfulness before, and nobody in the class raised their hands. And this year, when I asked the same question, how many of you have heard of mindfulness, about 2 didn't lift their hands. And then I asked the question, how many of you have or have had a regular practice? And probably 6 to 10 of them raised their hands again. So I think we have done some nice work within our system for there to be a more organized approach to integrating mindfulness into curriculum and everyday life, et cetera. But I think there's been a culture shift independent of our work. I think that the culture out there is just is knowing more and interested more in mindfulness in general. Having said that, like I said, I integrated into our curriculum. And then my first sabbatical, which was 8 years ago now, I took some time, worked with the MBSR people, the Omega Institute, the University of California, Berkeley, to do some training in teaching mindfulness and MBSR, et cetera. So when I came back, I was pretty excited about mindfulness and in the context of medical education. And all I did, Mick, was I just asking questions. Was there anyone else out there? And I knew of a couple of people who were. And they told me about 2 friends, and those 2 friends told me about 2 friends. And I started recognizing that, as with so many things, there were just a bunch of silos. People out there who said, I'm the only one who's teaching mindfulness at the Cumming School of Medicine. It's like, that's the 3rd conversation that I've had today with people who said the same thing. So I started to just make those connections and let each other know what we were at, and then starting to swap resources and support each other in their practice. And just before COVID hit, we had decided to have our first meeting and, had the idea that somehow we should form a collective of some sort or a cooperative, so that we weren't a bunch of silos now who knew about each other, but that we could create a larger kind of community with tentacles going out in all kinds of different directions. So it was a slow thing. I think that largely we were tapping into a lot of things that were already there and just kind of coordinating the people who were around. And again, I think that there was just a culture shift in general towards more people being more enthusiastic about it. So we picked up a lot of those people along the way as well.
Great. So we have this fertile field that seemed to develop with these silos being pulled together. And along the way, you must have met Ward. And at Ward, I'd like you to kind of then take us from there because of your connections with leadership and also being in the patient safety and risk realm. Did you feel there was some connection with the patient care mission and safety and quality that kind of also helped you to begin having much higher level conversations? So take us there. I really want to hear about then how did it become kind of an institutional wide accepted project that you two were leading?
I go back to the days when I started doing some quality work in our Department of Medicine here in Calgary, and then was asked after about a year of doing that to become the leader for the entire health region for quality. And a couple of years after I'd done that, two patients had died in our intensive care units related to being dialyzed with an inappropriate dialysis solution that we'd made ourselves in Calgary. And that suddenly put patient safety right front and center in everybody's consciousness. Long story short, I got asked to become a vice president of quality and safety for the entire Calgary health region. And then I needed to try to figure out how do you make healthcare safer. One of the things that I stumbled on was it's about culture. You can have individual tactics, but ultimately it's about attitude, behaviors, especially those of leaders. And so I worked really hard in getting to know the leaders of the health region and getting them involved in making the care safer rather than trying to do it myself. Fast forward about 10 or 15 years when I had been learning mindfulness on the side and I heard about Todd and we'd met. By that time, I knew quite a few people in the health region at a leadership level. I'd become a division head of respiratory medicine in Calgary by that time. And so the other thing you realize that most people know is it's often who you know and how long you've known and what the quality is of your relationships with people. And so when I first met Todd and we shared this, not only interest in mindfulness, but this interest in basically allowing more people to hear about it. So we came up with this idea of inviting you and Ron to Calgary to teach mindful practice in medicine. And that required a lot of ingenuity in terms of how do we actually make this work. So we worked on that, but that required some leadership support as well. And like most things, when you see the potential, you kind of go, well, how can we take it to the next level after that? And so I think it's all those things, the opportunity to find some innovative approaches to teaching mindfulness and what it can do for people, not only in practice, but people in their educational roles, but also how you can get some leaders interested in understanding that this is good for everybody. It's good for them. It's good for people that work in the medical school, and particularly it's good for patients.
Could you just allow us in on a little bit of what that experience was like having those conversations with some of the senior leaders? How did you speak about it? How did you approach that? And what were you aware of as a mindfulness practitioner as you could say, pitching an idea that this could be something really effective and also very unique for your leaders to invest in?
Yeah, I think like any situation, you need to read the room and you need to sort of, at least this is my approach, is who are the players, who are the decision makers? Do I know them personally? If not, do I know somebody who knows them? And can we be invited in to start having some conversations? Part of this was just pure good fortune that a longtime colleague of mine was the senior associate dean in the Faculty of Medicine here in Calgary at the Cumming School of Medicine. And so we go back a long ways. We trust one another emphatically. I could ask him for advice about how to approach these situations, test out some things with him in terms of the appetite at the leadership level, and not only how to go about doing it, but what messages would really resonate with people. And to be quite honest, which people we probably don't want to approach because it's not going to be particularly well supported. Unfortunately, we had a majority of people that were at least open to the discussion, but it was that key advisor, key friend, key longtime colleague that really provided the opening door.
That's great. And underneath or in between the words of what you're describing is kind of a certain level of awareness and ability to deeply listen to not what you want to hear, but what's actually unfolding. And so you're applying those skills right there in that situation. Todd, I'm wondering if you could just summarize where we are right now, where you are right now. I know that Ron and I have come out. We've trained well over 100 of your doctors in our core workshop and more than a dozen to become facilitators. Where are the efforts right now? In just a thumbnail sketch of that.
First of all, Ward is talking about having the ears of people in positions of authority and us getting that support. And really, in a lot of ways, Ward is that person for me, like in terms of the people that I have around. Ward is the guy who knows the guys and gals and everyone else. And so that has been that has made so much of what we're what we're embarking on right now possible. One of the things that Ward and I have also kind of molded together is a leadership team of people who are now looking after things like someone is responsible for helping guide our undergraduate medical education med school curriculum, which is being rolled out, some content for each of the 3 years, which is we're very excited about. And then also having some pre-packaged opportunities for the different residency programs. And through their postgraduate medical education, we'll be able to reach out to residency programs who would like some input from us, introductions to mindfulness and or support for ongoing practices, etc. We've already taken advantage of a couple of opportunities for that just this year. So we've got the undergrad, we've got the postgrad, we've got ongoing experiences like having you and Ron out to offer the core workshop twice. And now Ward has offered it twice and I've done it once. And so we're starting to kind of cultivate our own experience and learning, how to get better and offer those things for our community. And we also have ongoing drop-in mindfulness service that's available to everyone in the community. And we are getting better, I think, on a regular basis, offering evening mindfulness courses, again, to anybody who's interested. So I think those are the main areas that we're looking after. But going back to the point that I was starting to make earlier, and that is now we have a leadership team. So we have someone who's in charge of the medical school, someone who's in charge of postgrad, someone who's in charge of events, someone who's in charge of developing our funds and resources, and then someone who's in charge of facilitating the practice so that we as providers have some support for our practice and our growth in that, and also letting the whole community know what we're up to. So there has been a lot of change and growth in a pretty short order as we're pulling that leadership team together.
You mentioned collaborating with Ward, Todd, and I just want you to, if you could share a little bit about collaboration and mindfulness, concretely maybe about aspects of working with Ward and other colleagues, a more general application of, putting mindfulness, taking it from the conceptual or from the cushion to actually in the world. And how does it show up for you in collaboration? How do you bring to bear those qualities of openness, acceptance, curiosity, beginner's mind into collaboration?
Well, your question being, how do I bring it forward, and as best as I can on the good days, because there are certainly days when I don't bring it forward, but I'd like to think, and I have some collateral from my wife that this would be true as well, and that I do it more now than I did a decade or two ago. It's interesting. While you were asking the question, I sit on a few committees. One would be our Resident Progress Subcommittee, and another one is the National Committee for Health Professional Educators in Family Medicine. And for both of those, I've been able to implement like a standing agenda item where we start or end each of the meetings with a meaningful moment. So a moment where we've encouraged the people, in every meeting it's different and there's a schedule. You are minuted to kind of come in with a meaningful moment next time around. And there's an exercise that people go through where they're invited to spend some time really paying attention and being in moments with learners, and finding times when there has been a connection and when people have been mindful and open and present with that kind of stuff, and then sitting with it and writing about it, and then bringing their writing and sharing it in a committee setting. That's a very tangible way that we're bringing it into and formalizing, bringing those kinds of practices into our communities. But then aside from that, I think that I think Ward and I have been conscious about pulling together a leadership team who we feel help us be open and help us and hold us to account in some ways, to make sure that we are being present with each other and being open with each other. And, I know that that's a learning curve for me, because sometimes I'm able to and sometimes I'm not. And when I'm not, I'm better able to hold myself to account and listen to what other people have said when I haven't. So yeah, I think that we've done a good job of creating a team where those kinds of conversations are facilitated. And then also on another level, there are opportunities for us to formalize it and make it part of infrastructure for different committees, et cetera. We're doing that too.
Ward, yeah, just really anything, if you could just riff on collaboration and mindfulness. You've already given us a really interesting window into collaboration with how you view the patient safety, the effects it has on every member of the healthcare team, including the family members, the professionals, the staff, the whole ecosystem, we could call it. Yeah, just a little bit more about collaboration. And if you can throw in how you see it relative to the skills that mindfulness helps you with, that would be great.
I think the most fascinating thing that I've experienced over a lot of years is that you never know how things are going to change or evolve. I think of it as planting seeds, and things will grow. And my relationship with the Center for Mindfulness that Todd started, long before I met him, is a good example of that, of just because I knew somebody who said, "Do you know Todd Hill?" I said, "Nope, never met him before." Well, he's interested in mindfulness, introduced me, and then all sorts of things, neat things, opportunities came. I had the opportunity through my department head, who gave me Jill Horton's book for something that I had done for her. And as a thank you, she gave me Jill Horton's book. I don't usually slow down enough to read an entire book, but I did read Jill's and was captured by it. And that was right around the same time I was meeting Todd. And so those things. Short time after that, about a year after that, our department had invited Jill to come to Calgary to work with some of our post-grad residents. We were at a dinner together. I sat down with her, said, "Hey, would you ever want to teach a mindfulness course sometime?" She said, "Sure." So 8-9 months later, she and Todd and I are teaching a weekend retreat of mindful practice and medicine up in Banff to 30 residents. One of those residents was so, more than one, but one in particular was so taken by it. She started her own mindfulness group in her own residency program, and then came back to Todd and said, "Hey, could you help find some people to help facilitate maybe 10 sessions with our residency group meeting on a weekly basis?" So those are all connections that none of us could have foreseen, but just happened because of this person helped this person who helped this person. And great things grow sometimes through all of that. And so it's that collaboration. And I think that's the neat part, that you get even a little bit of that and you kind of go, hey, this is meaningful. I want to keep planting seeds. I want to keep meeting people that I wasn't expecting to meet, and who knows what will happen. So it's been a great journey so far.
Hey, you want to add something, Todd? Yeah.
I do. I just, two things. First of all, I don't think I was on Ward's radar and Ward wasn't on my radar, but it really does feel like there was some rocket fuel in there somewhere. I think that right around the time when the two of us got together, and again, you don't know what's out there, and so just being open, I think, and taking advantage of the opportunities that come to you. But yeah, I mean, the real rocket juice came when Ward came in, and we sat down, and things really started to happen. The other point was that Ward, at some point over the past 2 years, it seemed like a theme that kept on occurring to you. Like you did your meditations about it on the Wednesdays, and it was something that you had raised a number of times, and that was impermanence. And so that whole period, the impermanence period for Ward, really kind of left an impression on me that I share and spread widely as well. Is that just wait, because if things are going great, they will change, and if they're going terrible, they will change, and if they're going blah, they will change. So over the time that we've known each other, lots has changed.
So we're nearing the end of our conversation, and I'm going to pose to you an imaginary scenario, something that I ask a lot of the guests to think about when they're sharing the work they're doing, and something that I think I've shared with you in other contexts, something like this. And then I'll ask each of you to just share your reflections. So just imagine 3, 5, 10 years from now that all the things you've been working toward, this project at the Cumming School of Medicine, the University of Calgary, and your mindfulness center, and et cetera, have been met with great success. The center at the Cumming School is truly and deeply transformative. The place is different in very clear and ways that everyone can tell. It's a place to learn, a place to grow, a place to cultivate a career of meaning and purpose, a place to serve, a place to deliver high quality care. So just 3 potential ways to think about sharing. What would you experience as part of this community 3, 5, 10 years from now, when that's fact, day to day, moment to moment? What would that experience be like for you? Another way to approach it is, how would your colleagues or a staff member or even our patients, our students, our trainees experience the place? And then finally, if another option is, how did you get here? What was required to get from where you are today to that mythical, almost impossible place 3, 5, 10 years from now, where it's actually really here?
No, it's a great question. And actually, I just came back from doing our weekly drop-in mindfulness session, and a woman joined us today. At first, I knew the name, but I couldn't remember how. But this woman had been the facilitator for our visioning, half-day retreat. And, I'm a skeptic on any number of things, but certainly skeptical about visioning and mission statements, et cetera. But I have to say that we absolutely nailed it. And everyone who hears our vision statement and our mission statements, are pretty excited about it as well. The vision is to cultivate a culture of compassionate caring. And I think that 10 years, if we can look at our community and we can stand out because that we have been successful in cultivating a community of compassionate caring, that would be amazing. And I feel like we're already on that way. So that would be great. And I guess the other thing, I'm not a physician, but I'm surrounded by physicians a lot. And I know that a physician's life is particularly challenging and stressful. One of the things that I often notice that physicians forget or lose sight of is that the work that they do every day, from that first patient to the last patient and all of the tasks in between, is incredibly meaningful. even if they've lost track of it, even if it's just a small thing, a touch on the arm or figuring something out that the patient couldn't possibly have figured out for themselves. So helping clinicians recognize the meaning in their work, being aware of it, and really feeling that would be great too. That people were practicing medicine and being aware of the meaning in that practice. Those two things, I think, would be top of mind for me.
How about you, Ward?
If this progresses the way we would love it to, we would have leaders who would live the vision and mission that we set out from the Center for Mindfulness. One of the things I've learned throughout my leadership career, even though I never planned on becoming a leader, was that leaders really set the tone for culture. And you can have all your vision and mission statements that you want. And the reason why many people are skeptical of them, like Todd has been and I have been, is that sometimes it's just empty words and nobody really embodies them. We've been quite fortunate, I think very fortunate, to have some leaders that have embodied that naturally. But I think if we take the natural ability to be compassionate, even late in your career when you're a senior leader, and we combine that with some background knowledge around mindfulness and mindful practice in medicine, and we get critical mass, we get to that tipping point of people where we just do this because that's the way we do business around here, which is one definition of culture, as opposed to that Dr. Hill's reminding them that they really should do this, or that we're going to have a mindful moment now in this meeting because that's how we're trying to invent the culture around here. So I think that leaders that are like that encourage other leaders to come up through the system that are more compassionate, and it becomes a part of the fabric of the institution. And so I really, in 5 or 10 years from now, it may not impact me because I may not be a faculty member in 5 or 10 years from now, but if it's a friend or a colleague's son or daughter who are in medical school, that they will be able to say, this is a different place that I've ever, compared to what I've been exposed to in the past. People actually care, not because they have to, but because they want to. As you also probably know, you're never a prophet in your own land. So the fact that you and Ron have taken interest in the Cumming School of Medicine, have come to Calgary, to Alberta on several occasions, have met with the leaders, that has been a key ingredient to them taking this more seriously than they might otherwise have. And the fact that you didn't just start doing this a couple of years ago and it's the flavor of the week or flavor of the year. You've been doing this for 20 years and you were prepared to spend the time and the effort in helping us, but also helping the leaders. It makes a big difference.
Thanks for listening to this episode. We will include a summary of today's podcast in the show notes with some references to the things we've discussed with Ward and Todd. I'd like to share another practical contemplative exercise to help you flourish. As Drs. Hill and Flemons have described, change can occur right in our own backyard, in our own communities. In this brief contemplation, I'd like you to begin just by bringing awareness to the professional communities or community in which you work. To the extent possible, as you bring to mind the office team, the clinical team, leadership teams, administrative people within your various groups, first noticing as you bring these into awareness, sensations in your own body, emotions, thoughts that stream up. Are they pleasant, unpleasant, kind of neutral? However they are for you, they are the experience of this moment. Now imagine how it could be. What would a high quality, meaningful, effective, and enjoyable team be like for you? A whole organization oriented in this way, a culture of medicine oriented that way. How might you experience that physically, emotionally, intellectually? And now, if you could perhaps you may not be able to do this part, but consider it a challenge, a little possibility. What is one thing, one act, one behavior, one change that you could actually bring to one or several of the teams that you work with that will help move you in that direction of a more effective, meaningful, enjoyable, high-quality experience? I hope you found this podcast and this simple reflection useful, and please join us again in the future for another episode of Flourishing in Medicine from Surviving to Thriving. To find out more about MPro, please visit www.mympro.com. If you'd like to know about MPro's peer support programs, www.mympro.com/peer-support. To find out more about the work I do, www.mickkrasnermd.com or www.mindfulpracticeinmedicine.com. And finally, if you are a physician or a medical student in need of more urgent support right now, consider calling the Physician Support Line at 1-888-409-0141 or visit www.physiciansupportline.com. Until next time.